Prepare to get dirty, because Nintendo just announced that the newest retro game to hit their Nintendo Switch Online service will be the 2000 racing game Excitebike 64. That's right, starting on August 30th, expansion pack subscribers will have access to not only the original Excitebike, but also its Nintendo 64 sequel. Well, that's cool, but are either of these games actually worth playing? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, Insight Video Gaming, The Games Machine, and more classic magazines to see what the critics said back when these games first came out. So go and grab your bike and get excited, because this is going to be a turbo-filled episode of the Nintendo Switch Online Review Crew.
ファミリーコンピューターにエキサイトバイク登場。コントローラーを駆使して次々現れる障害をクリア。大きくジャンプ。前後にバランスを移動させる高度なテクニック。さらに好きなコースを作ってゲームが楽しめるデザイン機能内蔵。ファミリーコンピューターエキサイトバイク。
Released all the way back in 1985, Excitebike has the distinction of being the very first racing game on the Nintendo Entertainment System. It's a dirt bike game where you swerve around a side-scrolling course filled with jumps and obstacles like puddles of mud. Admittedly, the game's pretty simple, but it's surprisingly intense for an 8-bit racing game, and allowed the developer to come up with a bunch of crazy level designs. Speaking of which, the game also comes with a level creator, a mode that was way ahead of its time. Now, if you're wondering what the critics thought of Excitebike back in 1985, then prepare to be disappointed, because there weren't a whole lot of magazines reviewing games that year. However, once again, the British press came through with reviews that are only a couple of years after the US release. For their part, Computer and Video Games gave the racing game a score of 8 out of 10. Though definitely expressed some skepticism going in. My first impressions of Excitebike were not too good. I've seen scores of similar products before, and the 3D perspective games have largely taken over from them. But this race game has the advantage of a course designer and a large range of objects. There's not much skill involved in clocking up a good time on the 2 Mattel tracks, but there's always the addiction of constantly trying to be number 1. You saw an almost identical score over at Nintendo Magazine System, who gave the game an 84% in their first issue. However, if you're looking for somebody to dunk some cold water all over this beloved racing game, then look no further than the Games Machine. Giving it a mere 52%, they concluded that Excitebike's graphics help make it a good-looking game, but even with the addition of a do-it-yourself track building kit, it gives a terrible feeling of deja vu. Racing games have been around for several years, and although this is very playable, it tires steadily as you play. Being so easy to play and master, it may appeal to younger people, but we doubt whether there is much lasting appeal for hardened arcade and racing fans. Oddly enough, CVG and the Games Machine are really saying very similar things, only with one feeling like the design mode makes all the difference. I'm not sure that's much of a selling point in 2023, but you should still give Excitebike a play, at least once in your life. After taking a generation off to create new racing franchises like F-Zero, Stunt Race FX, and of course Super Mario Kart, Nintendo decided to return to their roots with the Nintendo 64. After a 15-year absence, Excitebike returned to home consoles with a whole new look and a more modern camera angle. The new 3D perspective freed up the developers to come up with some more varied and interesting stages, many of which featured new obstacles and even a couple of shortcuts. And while the game doesn't really look or play much like the original 1985 classic, there are still a bunch of mini-games and races to keep you from caring. But did the critics care about Excitebike 64? Well, let's find out. Over at Electronic Gaming Monthly, Cyril joked about the 15-year break between games. I doubt many of the N64 owners will remember the original Excitebike, which is probably a good thing, since this game has little to do with the original. Instead, try to think of games like Wave Race and Beetle Adventure Racing. Excitebike 64 has the same tight control and interesting track design with gobs of addictive gameplay. Moving over to Greg, he didn't like the game quite as much as Cyril, but he was still quick to praise the racer. Excitebike 64 is the best motocross sim on the N64 to date. Strategic use of the turbo button and landing square on two wheels after every jump is the key to success, just like the 8-bit classic. He concluded that there's more than enough levels and modes to satiate N64 players who are used to a little more bang for the buck. EGM gave Excitebike 64 an average score of 9 out of 10. That's the kind of score you saw pop up a lot when talking about this game. N64 Magazine gave it a 90% in their 43rd issue, while the official Nintendo Magazine landed on a 93% in issue 105. However, if you're looking for the highest score, then look no further than the short-lived Lads magazine, Insight. Giving it a perfect 5 out of 5, they concluded that Excitebike 64 forgoes putting some motocross star on the cover and focuses on what's true, exceptional gameplay. Step aside, McGrath, you've just been smoked. Now, while the game certainly earned its fair share of high scores, the sweet spot was around 80%. You saw the Australian mag Hyper give it a 77%, while Game Fans settled on a 82%. That's right in line from GamePro's 4 out of 5, and the 8 out of 10 that we saw over at Edge. Speaking of Edge, their sister magazine, Next Generation, ended up giving the game 4 stars out of 5 and raving that the physics of the game are spectacular. You get awesome air over jumps, and with a well-timed blast of the turbo button, you'll go even higher. With all the secrets and special tracks, not to mention the realistic physics that'll make you wince during crashes, this is one motocross racing game that'll entertain for hours on end. You know, these days, the idea of a 3D motocross racing game isn't really that novel, but there are a lot of elements of Excitebike 64 that still hold up. It may not be as iconic as the original or as exciting as other N64 racers, but don't overlook Excitebike 64. It's a lot of fun.
Excitebike 64. Get serious air. Rated E for everyone.
Hey, thanks for watching me analyze these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post one of these episodes every single time Nintendo adds a new retro game to their online service. We have a whole playlist full of episodes just like this one, dozens of them, so go and give that a binge or something. Now, here's the question I have for you. What's your favorite racing game on the Nintendo 64? Also, where do you come down on Excitebike? Was the original a classic? Boy, I'm excited to see both answers in the comments below. Yeah, I know. Bonus works, assume me. In other news, we'll be back next week with a review of Synthwave Racers, followed by something very cool later in the week. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.